Jewish tradition. And there are a lot of 40s right now. You just had your 40th birthday.
Anniversary.
40th anniversary to the beautiful and wonderful Wendy Miller, who's back there. They just celebrated 40 years of marriage because when they arrived here to begin Rabbi Miller's tenure as the rabbi of Temple Bat Yam, it was only a few weeks after they got married. They were newlyweds. Honeymoon in Newport Beach sounded like a good idea. Lasted 40 years of honeymoon, right? And so this Shabbat coincides August 5th, 40 years since the first day Rabbi Miller began service here at Temple Bat Yam.
Amen.
So that's why it's 40th anniversary, and I think if we're very careful about how we divvy up the cake, we may have enough pieces for everyone here. They'll be very small, which is good because they'll be low calorie.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for
I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, let's see what's going on here. So Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Can you hear all right?
Good.
So nice to see you all and be with you on this Shabbat morning.
Thanks for coming.
Has everyone received a handout? I made 75 copies. Then the office made another 50. So who was right? Hillary was right?
With the help of Kim, Ellen, and Beth.
So let's say our traditional blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. So yes, this is the 40th anniversary of our first Shabbat with the temple. 40 years ago last night was the first Friday night we had Shabbat on the beach, Corona del Mar. It was a little bit of a culture shock. I usually, coming from Chicago and Washington, D.C. and New York and Cincinnati, I didn't associate Shabbat with frisbees.
Rollerblades.
So I remember, a white shirt in deference to my East Coast roots, but I wore it out for California.
That's true.
Wear socks?
No socks.
No tie.
No socks.
So for today, let's open in the Chumash. Our Torah portion this week is Va'et Hanan. And if you turn to page 968 and 969, we'll get to this teaching in just a moment. Let me begin by saying, before I say something, that among the most influential biblical verses in the history of civilization are the Torah's references to humankind being created in the image of God. This passage comes at the end of chapter 1 of Genesis. This value concept that we are created in God's image is the foundation of Jewish ethics. It is the source of Israel's moral law. That we are created in God's image is the essence of Torah. Now, if we were in our college course, you would now ask, will this be on the test? Yes. This would be appropriate for the yellow highlighter. The essence of Torah. While the ancient pagans pictured the gods created in the image of man, Judaism presented the doctrine of man created in the image of God. In paganism, the gods were projections of man, with all of our foibles and shortcomings and weaknesses, all of our imperfections. The gods simply reflected us. In Judaism, we are created in the image of God. And being created thusly expresses our view of the enormous value of human life, the inherent dignity of every human being, because every human being is created in God's image, and the respect required of us in all interpersonal relationships. The point of this morning's teaching is that since we are created in God's image, since that is the essence of the Torah, we have the responsibility and obligation, we have the opportunity and the freedom to follow God and emulate his ways. What I mean is that our supreme duty is to make our ways like those of our Creator. So, we are created in the image of God, and therefore we are called upon to emulate God. We're to carry out our deeds and guide our character development with the idea of imitating God. and to have our deeds resemble his deeds. Now you see that at the top of the handout. You see it first in the title in Latin at the top. This is the concept of imitatio Dei, of imitating God. It has its basis in Hebrew, because we have it first. And in Hebrew it's called V'halachta bidrachav. Now halachta, you shall walk. Holech, ani holech, I am walking. Or a woman says, ani holechet, I am walking. Halacha is Jewish law, the way to go, the way to live. So you shall holech, you shall walk, bidrachav, in his derech. Derech is a path, a road. You shall walk in God's path, as God has walked. So this is a fundamental teaching of Judaism. Because we are created in God's image, we should walk after God's ways. Now here on page 968 and 9, at the beginning of chapter 5 of Deuteronomy, in the portion Va'et Hanan, we have in verse 6, on page 969 in English, the beginning of the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments, of course, being one of the main symbols of Judaism. Not only lox and bagels, not only a chai, but the Ten Commandments. And here in the Torah portion, Va'et Hanan, we have the second presentation of the Ten Commandments in the Torah. The first is back in Exodus chapter 20. But here in Deuteronomy, as Moses is speaking his farewell speeches to the people of Israel a month before he dies, Moses reviews the 40 years in the wilderness, a great part of which were the Ten Commandments, so he repeats them, almost word for word. And here in the second presentation, in verse 6, we have, I am Hashem your God, who has taken you out of the land of Egypt from the house of slavery. Now we might consider this the first commandment, but we might also ask, what is being commanded here? There's no, you shall keep the Shabbat, you shall not murder, you shall not covet, you shall honor your parents, you shall not have any gods before me. Where is the commandment in verse 6? Well, many commentators say that this is not one of the 613 commandments, because nothing is being commanded here. Some say it is, because without a commander, there can be no commandments. And therefore, verse 6 tells us to believe in God. It doesn't say so outright, but that's certainly the implication. When God introduces himself as such, I am Hashem, we're certainly called upon to believe that that's a true statement. But the commentators tell us that this first statement of the 10, and by the way, that's why in Judaism we don't call them the 10 Commandments.
Utterings.
We don't call them the 10 Commandments. We call them the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 statements, or the 10 utterances. But the first here, whether it's a statement or a commandment, is taken by the commentators to mean it's more than about just belief in God. It also obligates us to imitate God, to emulate God, to walk in God's path. V'halachta b'drachav. So let's see how we should emulate God. If you look at the handout, here's from the Talmud. Rabbi Chama, the son of Rabbi Hanina, further said, what means the text, you shall walk after the Lord your God? Is it then possible for a human being to walk after the Shekhinah? The Shekhinah is the presence of God. And I think that what Rabbi Chama is saying is, how can the physical, we, apprehend the spiritual, God? How can the corporeal, that which is physical and flesh, comprehend God who is without form? How can the finite, we, comprehend the infinite, God? How can a human being walk after the Shekhinah? For has it not been said, for the Lord thy God is a devouring fire? How can we relate to that? But the meaning is to walk after the attributes of the Holy One. Blessed be He. You see, we can never know God as God is. We can never know the nature of God. We can only know, to an extent, what God does, what God has revealed to us about Himself, not of Himself, because we could never understand it. So God has showed us how He acts, what He wants from us in our actions, to imitate Him. And that's how we should walk after the Shekhinah. And let's look at Rabbi Chama's several examples. As God clothes the naked, for it is written, and the Lord God made for Adam and for his wife coats of skin and clothed them, so do thou also clothe the naked. The Holy One, blessed be He, visited the sick. For it is written, and the Lord appeared unto him by the oaks of Mamre. So do thou also visit the sick. Who did He visit? Abraham. By the oaks of Mamre. Abraham had just had surgery. He performed it on himself. Without anesthesia. At age 99. And it was a hot day. God came and asked how he was doing. The Holy One, blessed be He, comforted mourners. For it is written, and it came to pass after the death of Abraham, that God blessed Isaac his son, who was in mourning. So do thou also comfort mourners. The Holy One, blessed be He, buried the dead, for it is written, and He buried him in the valley. So do thou also bury the dead. Who did He bury in the valley? Moses. Do we know where Moses is buried today exactly?
No.
And why not?
We don't want him to be a deity.
We don't want him to be a deity. We don't want his grave to be a shrine. We don't want to make pilgrimages there and confuse him with God. We believe in God. We believe in man. They never inhabit one another. Am I clear? I have to go into this?
Crystal.
So Rabbi Kama in the Talmud teaches us that we are to emulate God's ways, and it is God's chesed that we are to emulate. Let's learn that word.
So.
Chesed, chesed, chesed. Loving kindness, compassion, mercy. All of these 4 examples refer to God's chesed. He did something above and beyond the call of duty. That's chesed. Doing a mitzvah, that's a commandment. But doing chesed is lifnei b'shorat hadin, going above and beyond what is required of us into the realm of loving kindness, of compassion, of mercy and generosity. And further, we believe that this chesed is to be devoted to several classes of people, especially compassion toward the poor, the stranger, the orphan, and the widow. Now, the attitude of the Torah toward wealth is very positive. The Torah recognizes that there will always be poor people, as well as wealthy people. But 2 things matter: how our wealth is used or abused, and whether one is grateful to God for it. We're responsible to use our wealth to help the needy, the poor, the stranger, the widow, the orphan, the vulnerable in our society or on the margins of society. How our wealth is used. Is it hoarded or is it given? Are we selfish? Are we altruistic? If someone examined the stubs of our checkbook, what would they find in terms of our tzedakah? You know, a rabbi stood before the congregation, there was a leaky roof, and he said, I have good news and bad news. The good news is we have the money to fix the roof. The bad news is it's still in your pocket. And Lord Rothschild once sat with his biographer, and the biographer asked him how much Lord Rothschild was worth. And he opened his desk and took out one of 2 ledgers and handed it to the biographer to peruse. And the biographer opened it and saw that it was a record of Lord Rothschild's contributions to charity. And he said, Lord Rothschild, I think you gave me the wrong ledger. I asked how much you're worth. And he said, yes. This is what I'm worth. This no one can take from me. What I have given is my wealth, not what I've taken, not what I've amassed. If you look on the handout in Psalm 82, verse 3, there you see one of many verses attesting to this emphasis in Torah on emulating God through chesed and specifically to certain classes of people. Psalm 82 instructs us, do justice to the needy and orphan. Deal righteously with the poor and impoverished. Rescue the needy and destitute, and save them from the hand of the wicked. And then in Isaiah chapter 1, it makes the same point. Learn to do good, seek justice, aid the oppressed, defend the orphan, plead for the widow. And then, although it's not on our handout sheet, I'll just teach that Job, the paradigmatic sufferer of the Bible, described the way a person with means is supposed to live life. Job was a wealthy man. It says in his book that he treated everyone with dignity. His servants, for example, as well as all others. He took care of the poor and needy, the orphan and the widow. He was not materialistic. He says, quote, I never made gold my hope, or rejoiced because my wealth was great. So why does Job and the Psalm and Isaiah and so many others teach us to live with chesed toward those less fortunate? Well, in the ancient Near East, and when this was written, women and children often lacked the means to inherit property. Those without a husband, those without a father to protect them, were typically the poorest in the community. So God's compassion for widows and orphans is part and parcel of Torah law. God's ultimate purpose. And if we're imitating God, our ultimate purpose is to provide these individuals with a measure of economic security, to protect them from those who have the power to abuse them. It said here, protect them from the wicked, those who will exploit the poor, the orphan, the widow, to their own ends, to their own uses. Those who will put a stumbling block before the blind, as it says in Leviticus chapter 19. Those who will take advantage of the vulnerable, insecure position of the poor. Now look with me a few chapters on, here in Deuteronomy chapter 10. Chapter 10, verse 17. If you look on page 991. Chapter 10 now, verse 17, about the middle of the page. For Hashem your God, He is the God of the powers and the Lord of the lords, the great, mighty, and awesome God. Where do we have that expression? Where have you said that expression? Many, many, many times. What is that?
High Holy Day liturgy.
No, High Holy Day, yes. High Holy Day, yes.
God of awesome deeds.
God of awesome deeds, yes, it's in the High Holy Days. You know the person who said, every time I come to temple, they're blowing the shofar. Ha'el, Hagadol, Hagibor, V'Hanora, El Elyon. In the Avot prayer. Great, mighty, and awesome. There it is. Who does not show favor He is not partial to the poor or the wealthy, and who does not accept a bribe on their behalf. Next page. He carries out the judgment of orphan and widow and loves the proselyte to give him bread and garment. But let's stop there. He carries out the judgment of orphan and widow. So not only does he care for the less fortunate, he tells us that if you don't, he will carry out a judgment upon you. He warns you here. Now, one more thought about the poor and the vulnerable, and why we have to treat with chesed. An Israelite might become impoverished for various reasons. The harvest might fail. Lack of rain. Or the untimely death of the male leader of the family. But no matter what the reason for the poverty, God never blames the poor for being poor. It's not a moral failing to be poor. So God instructs us to care for the poor because they have become poor through no fault of their own. Instead, he charges us who have means with the responsibility to care for the poor. Perhaps you know, back in Leviticus chapter 19, as we're about to enter the promised land, what is the landowner supposed to do with his produce? Is he supposed to glean every single stalk of grain, every grape? Is he supposed to thresh to the corners? What is the farmer supposed to do according to Leviticus?
Leave the corners.
The corners or for the poor.
He's supposed to leave the corners of the field for the poor, called peyot, the corners, peyot. To leave them, the harvesting and gathering for the poor. Purposely, purposefully. Leave the remnants behind. Don't go back and be a hazard. Leave it. Now, Leviticus prescribes this right in the middle of a text telling us how to lead a sanctified life. Well, this is one way to lead a sanctified life. To leave some of ours for the poor and the needy. And let me go one step further. To not say ours. To not say ours. Because one day we'll find that it's not as ours as we thought it might be. As I've taught you before, we see that a baby is born with fists clenched, as if to say, I'm going to take it all, grab it all the gusto. Carpe diem, I'm going to seize the day, have it, and when we die, everything relaxes. You open it up, there it is. It all dribbled through our fingers. It's not ours any longer. Now it, quote, belongs to somebody else. So, what I like about leaving for the poor is that the poor have to work for what they receive. They have to go to the field and glean themselves. They just can't sit back and receive a check. Now, if you're a conservative, you really like this. You know the difference between a conservative and a liberal? They're both walking on the beach, and they see a man drowning 100 feet offshore. The conservative throws him 50 feet of rope and walks away. And the liberal throws him 500 feet of rope and says, you know, now come on in. So, to become a close-knit society, we have to show chesed to the poor. Now, finally, what about some other people? Why does the Torah forbid mistreatment of orphans and widows? What about women with spouses? What about children with parents? Well, let's look at Maimonides here. One is obliged to exercise care with regard to orphans and widows, even if they are wealthy. Even a king's widow and orphans, we are warned with regard to them. How are we to deal with them? One must speak with them only softly and should treat them only honorably. And one may not inflict pain upon their bodies through hard labor or in their hearts through harsh words, and one must care for their money more so than his own. So Maimonides says it is a violation to ill-treat the widow or orphan, but this applies to all people. We cannot mistreat anyone. And I like the fact that it says you cannot mistreat them through words, not only through physical attack, but as some people know, as all people know, we can be hurt by words, by statements, as much as we can through people's physical actions to us. So we have to treat all, not just the widow and orphan, with respect and dignity. So let's look at this real case called the Jewish ethicist, widows and orphans. As customers, do widows deserve special treatment? Here's the question. If I have a customer who is a widow, should I give her a discount? If she's late paying, am I allowed to use normal collection actions? Answer. In many places, the Torah admonishes us to display special consideration towards widows. We will be able to answer your question if we examine the nature of those varying admonitions. Number one, the most common motif regarding widows is to take account of their generally precarious economic circumstances. In at least half a dozen places, the Torah specifically mentions widows as among those needy individuals we should provide for when we give charity, agricultural tithes, and so on. Someone who has enough is always obligated to provide for those who are needy. But we should pay particular attention to the widow because of the unusual difficulty she has in supporting herself and often raising a family. Number two, the Torah tells us, don't cause anguish to any widow or orphan. This commandment relates to any widow, whether rich or poor, as Maimonides just taught us. Here, special consideration for the widow is called for because of the likelihood of emotional vulnerability. The memory of loss, together with the ongoing experience of going it alone, mean that the widow is likely to be more in need of support and encouragement than others. So the first consideration is relevant to your question if the widow is poor. While there is no particular commandment to give a discount to poor people, or to refrain from collecting from them, the ideal way of helping the needy is through normal market transactions. If you are in a position to give charity to the poor, then an excellent way of doing so is by giving service to them at especially low prices or at unusually favorable terms of credit. And this would apply particularly to a widow. Now, the second consideration is relevant irrespective of the widow's financial situation. We need to relate to everybody in a thoughtful and considerate way. But this is particularly important with someone who is emotionally vulnerable. Between these two extremes of economic and emotional interaction, there's an intermediate kind, the human dimension of our market activities. This aspect is related in the Torah in a third mandate, which is a hybrid of the other two. The Torah warns us not to demand collateral from a widow before the loan is due. Don't distort the judgment of a stranger or orphan, and don't possess the garment of a widow. The Talmud concludes that this commandment, despite its economic nature, applies even to a wealthy widow. The explanation is that this kind of demand can be demeaning or distressing beyond its economic impact and into the emotional sphere. So this commandment is relevant for your situation. A person is always allowed to collect money for services rendered. But even legitimate collection actions sometimes have a way of declining into very adversarial procedures that neither side is necessarily particularly proud of afterwards. So if a widow is involved, we should be especially careful to make sure all collection actions or legal actions are carried out in a business-like fashion. And in general, we should learn from the Torah's attitude toward widows that we should display special consideration toward anyone who is financially or emotionally vulnerable. And let's pause here and see if there are any questions or comments. Yes?
Rabbi, at the time of the writing here, of course, women died in childbirth rather frequently, leaving widowers. Well, it's not quite the same. How the Torah handle the man without a wife and his children in this particular teaching of Chesed and things like that?
Well, both are expected to remarry in ancient times. Both the widow and widower, whether it's through levirate marriage or marriage some months after the wife dies, both are expected to remarry to build up the name or to build up the family or line, etc. So that's just an expectation back then. Yeah.
Rabbi, taking this in context in Deuteronomy, Moses saying that we were going through the desert and encountering hostile tribes. This was not only, I see, as a plan for us as a developing community, but we were going in, fighting battles, making widows of other people whose land we would inhabit. So this is not only a lesson for us, it's a lesson, as you said, for all people, how we extend our relationships.
Yes, but I would say that the Torah here is mandating interpersonal relationships with our fellow Jewish people,
Okay.
not with the Amorites or the Moabites or the enemies of the Jewish people. Anybody else? Yes.
I have an aunt who was in, I guess you call senior housing facility in Westwood. And my uncle died, and right after that, this landlord of this big building notified all the real old people, 90, 104, some of them are 105. Well, you have to move out, you have 2 months left because I'm converting it to condos. And there was a big hullabaloo about it, and adult children went to the local councilman, and they got a little bit of a stay till the end of this year, but she decided to move with her daughter's help. It was such an emotional toll, and you see this repeated over and over, that the people, you know, not just widowed, but the elderly and very old, that it's really heartbreaking. And I wish there were some kind of law that would at least protect people in that situation. And here's an example of not just the widow, but widow and elderly.
Well, yes, I wish too that there wasn't such cruelty in the world, and that more people conducted themselves with chesed, and that more people took the Torah mandates seriously, and read them and lived them. Apparently greed is a primary cause for many to how they engage with other people, and it overrides the loving kindness, mercy, and compassion with which we should interact. But as they say, it's a jungle out there.
And I would put the elderly in this category.
Yeah.
To me, it's the same, and particularly elderly.
The elderly.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Anybody else, quickly? Yes.
Unfortunately, if you make a law that doesn't allow them to move the people out, the greedy people will find a way to make their lives shorter so that they can still build that building. And that's the problem with doing laws like that. You make it so that they can't move until these people pass. They're going to be passing early because greed doesn't stop at what's right.
Thank you. Let's look at one example of chesed, of walking in God's ways. I think I showed this to this class about 4 or 5 years ago. Some of you may not have attended the class then. Some of you may not have been in attendance that day. Some of you were and don't remember it. So it's worth seeing again. But I thought this was a wonderful example, and it even bears repeating if I told it to this class, which I don't remember. So there you see a photograph. If you've ever been on the New York subway, something like this doesn't happen often. This photograph went viral. Well, we'll see why. In a long life of quiet good deeds that generally go unnoticed, except by the individuals on the receiving end, Isaac Thiel, age 65, had no hidden agenda last Thursday when he felt his neighbor on the Brooklyn-bound Q train nod off on his shoulder. And then he let him sleep soundly for the better part of the next hour. A fellow passenger, taken by this scene, was further struck when Thiel politely declined his offer to rouse the dozing strap hanger. He must have had a long day. Let him sleep. We've all been there, right? Said Thiel. The astounded passenger took a furtive photograph, posted it with an accompanying caption on Reddit, and the rest, as they say, is social media history. The photo quickly made its way through the blogosphere and garnered over 1 million likes and nearly 200,000 shares on Facebook. This is not a Twitter thing, is it? You don't put pictures on, I don't know.
No, you do.
You do?
It was on Twitter as well.
Even on Twitter? I've heard about Twitter.
That can be your first.
Apparently you go on Twitter at the best times in the middle of the night. You know, I've written things in the middle of the night. I've usually awakened and said, but some people wake up and say, well, this is great, I should say this. The whole thing was happenstance, and I simply remembered the times my own head would bop on somebody's shoulder because I was so tired after a long day. Theo recounted, sounding bewildered by his sudden catapult into viral internet fame. The still identified young man remained fast asleep as the train pulled into Newkirk Avenue, Theo's usual point of departure, and Theo gently eased him off his shoulder before exiting. When I got off the subway, I didn't give it a second thought. It was Theo's sister in Montreal, Pam Russ, who called him early the next morning to let him know. He appeared in an online photo. Her eagle-eyed son had spotted his uncle and quickly alerted family members. Before long, the phone calls poured in from family and friends who were seeing it everywhere. When Theo arrived at shul for Shabbat the next day, the rabbi gave him a huge smile and 2 thumbs up before making his way over to praise his Kiddush Hashem. What's a Kiddush Hashem?
Holy God.
What is it?
Holy God.
Sanctifying God's name on earth. Kiddush Hashem. Sanctifying God's name. By doing a chesed. Are we getting this word yet? The opposite of a Kiddush Hashem is Chilul Hashem, desecrating God's name on earth. By a sin. Now, who lets a random stranger sleep on his shoulder in germ-filled New York City? Asked Theo's 32-year-old daughter, Hela. But this is just typical of Dad. Other family members, friends, and neighbors corroborated Hela's observation of her father's penchant for doing good deeds in his typically unassuming manner. Many shared their experiences with these acts of kindness, chesed, online. Yehuda Jason Schuper, a neighbor of Theo's younger daughter, Shira, 27, shared the time his wife was waiting outside for an ambulance to take his daughter to the emergency room after an accidental injury. Mr. Thiel observed my frantic wife, and though he knew her only in passing, immediately offered to drive her to the hospital and then did so. Isaac's lovely act of graciousness toward a stranger on the train is emblematic of the life he leads and behavior that he strives for, said Orly Zorberon, a close relative. He is a kind and generous person who takes to heart the Jewish tenet of do unto others. All right, let's stop here for just 1 second. Chesed is not just a good deed. Mr. Thiel did a good deed on the train. Almost a miraculous deed on the New York train. But this was not what we call a one-off. This was not some isolated good deed he did spontaneously. He is living a life of such deeds. And other people you see are attesting to it. Chesed is not what he does. Chesed is who he is. And as Maimonides teaches us, the more we do something, the more we become what we do. The hand habituates the heart. If you want a goodly character, then we have to perform chesed consistently. I used to see a bumper sticker. Practice random acts of kindness. I wanted to go up next to the car and honk and. It's not random acts of kindness. You know what I mean? He's looking at me like that. It's consistent acts of kindness. What else do you do in your life? Do you love your family randomly? Do you withdraw from the bank randomly? I mean, what do you do randomly in your consistently? The Rambam Maimonides says if you have 100 shekels, give 1 shekel 100 times over and over, instead of 100 shekels all at once. So you become inured to giving. You become a giving person. Okay? And a story I've told in here, but some haven't heard it. Usually in here where we have the board meetings, it's all been said, but not everyone has said it. Here it may have been said, but not everyone has heard it yet. So about an actor, Richard Barry Harrison, who in the 1930s took the role of the Lord in God's Little Acre display. And the cast members said this actor was a real chalela, which will go untranslated. But then they said, after over 1,600 appearances as God, he became a godly person. He was a pleasure to be with. You see, imitating God tells us something about our potential and our limitations. Our potential when we imitate God is to be godly. Our limitation is we can't be God. We can be only godly and do what God does. There are, after all, 2 signs of maturity in a person. That moment when he realizes his parents aren't God. Comes to everybody. The second is that moment when he realizes he isn't God. It comes to the civil. Here is a lifetime devoted to chesed. Okay. Nina Rudy, a longtime family friend, said that in the 20 plus years she's known him, Mr. Thiel has always taken a genuine interest in people, asks how they're doing, because he really wants to know. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I have chills. This is unusual. Ever have someone come up to you and say, how are you, and walk away? Wait a minute, wait. Can you sit down for a few minutes? Wait a minute. Well, they say don't complain because 80% don't care and 20% think you deserve it. Not because he's fulfilling some bad obligation to make small talk. Even, listen, look at this one. Even Helda's ex-husband, Yehuda Feldman, speaks kindly of him. Maintaining warm relationships to ex-in-laws might be the most irrefutable evidence to Thiel's all-around likability factor. Despite the fact that I am no longer married to his daughter, Isaac made sure to let me know that he would always be there for me if I ever needed anything. Needless to say, this attitude is not very common in cases of divorce. So finally, Elad Nahorai, a popular blogger who runs, I have to look this up, Pop Chassid, was the one who pulled the photo from Reddit and first posted it on Facebook. As the director of marketing for Charity a startup dedicated to reinventing the way people support charities. Nahora is always on the lookout for things to post on social media that foster communal goodwill. I thought the photo was a perfect fit as soon as I saw it, though I had no way of knowing if it would take off, he explained. Clearly, people have responded. And I think it's small moments like this one, which are easily captured and spread across the internet, that help to restore people's faith in humanity amid the terrible news stories that we're bombarded with on a frequent basis. You don't usually see this in the paper. You don't usually see this on the news. You don't usually find this on the internet. But it's the small deeds of loving kindness that will save us. Of course, the internet always invites remarks from those who are more small-minded. And several commentators have offered up their worst racial assumptions about the image. Others have taken offense to the photo's captions, references to the religion and race of the two men, as though that what was made the story so compelling. Maybe the photo wouldn't have been so popular if people weren't seeing a Jewish man with a yarmulke and a black man in a hood, and because they might not necessarily correlate the two, theorized Theo. You know how often you see a man with a yarmulke in the paper? He's in court. You see it. Or he's got his coat over his hands for some reason. Because it's a Hilul Hashem. It's a desecration of God's name. Not a Kiddush Hashem. But here you see a man with a yarmulke. It's a Kiddush Hashem. There was only one reason I didn't move and let him continue sleeping. It has nothing to do with race. He was simply a human being created in the image of God who was exhausted. I knew it. I happened to be there. I had a big shoulder to offer him, period. Theo jokes that his 15 minutes of viral fame are almost up. But he gets serious when he says that what he hopes people remember is not him, so much as the opportunity to help the next person out, whether it's on the subway or elsewhere. I would love people to use this as a lesson to just be good to each other. As Rabbi Heschel said, when I was young, I admired clever people. Now that I'm older, I admire kind people. It's a wonderful way to live as well. Any questions or reactions to this particular piece? Yes.
There's a remarkable story about your beloved Cubs this week, something very special they did about forgiveness. I imagine you know this story?
Well, go ahead.
Steve Bartman.
Oh, yes, I do know this.
Steve Bartman, who is being held responsible for their last chance prior to this year. He grabbed a ball from the player who, and they turned him into the GOAT of Chicago for losing the World Series. And he almost was run out of town. His life was ruined because of this. And just this week, the Chicago Cubs decided to reach out to him and offer him a World Series ring. They said all is forgiven and the community should re-embrace you.
And it had his name on it.
Yes, it was a very generous act of giving Steve Bartman this World Series ring as a sign of forgiveness. There's one word that I object to in what I believe Steve Bartman said. He said something to the effect that now I have closure.
Never.
Dear friends, as I've said so many times, there is no such thing as closure. This is my view.
That door's always...
The door's always ajar. The memories, the experiences, they're still there. We're still wounded to some extent. Jacob wrestles with an angel all night, and he emerges victorious over this assailant, but he limps the rest of his life. There's just never closure over an experience. As we don't want closure over a good experience, we have to recognize that there's no closure over a bad one. These 11 years in which he experienced this being shunned and being a pariah cannot just vanish with the bestowal of a ring. It's a wonderful gesture, but closure,
Ain't happening.
yes. Tamar.
In the quotation from the beginning, that God points out, he took us out from slavery. I think it does give us a commandment that we should not be enslaved, we should not enslave others, and it's already a commandment of how to behave. That's so important, especially in those days,
Yes.
you know. And today I was reading a book called Beneath the Scarlet Sky, which is fantastic, about World War II in Italy, one young man's life. And there he is with a Nazi who is driving, when I say driving, I don't mean in a car. He's the driver, actually, of the Nazi's car. But excuse me, the Nazi is in charge of men in gray who are slaves under the Nazi rule. And I never heard of anything like that. It was very eye-opening
Yes.
and moving.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because it gives me the opportunity to say that throughout the Torah, we are commanded to love or to be kind to the stranger. And the justification is not because it's nice, not because it's socially acceptable, not because you want to get a good feeling, but because you were strangers in the land of Egypt and I took you out. Because I don't want you to be in that position, and I freed you from Egyptian bondage. That is a commandment, and it's repeated, I'm glad to say, 36 times. It is the most oft repeated commandment in the Torah, be kind to the stranger, and there are no accidents. It's repeated double high, 36 times in the Torah, that commandment. In the first of the 10 utterances, it seems to be a little more implicit. God is setting an example. But whether it's here or in the 36, it's still imitatio Dei. We're supposed to do all we can so that people are not enslaved. And I don't only mean enslaved to physical bondage. There are all kinds of slaveries in this world. Yes, Rob?
So it's interesting, but people that have addictions because they're doing something and there's some positive feedback and they want to do it again. It's interesting that when we do a good deed, we perform chesed, you feel good about it. It should be addicting.
Yes. It should be addicting. Ultimately, we should do it because we're emulating God. If we get a good feeling from it, I think that that's the icing on the cake. But we do it because we're commanded by God to walk in His ways. And God tells us that's the most sacred life. To be concerned about others and be compassionate about others. And as we've said many times, the opposite of love is indifference, not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. If you want to tell me your troubles and I say I don't care, you can be sure that there's no love being extended from me to you. The opposite of love is indifference. Love means concern and compassion, or put them together, chesed. Yes.
What do you think of fair-weather friends? There are many people that are only there for the sick and the poor when things are bad. They're not there when things are good.
What do I think of fair-weathered
Or
friends?
relatives.
What?
Or relatives too.
Relatives.
Or relatives? They don't come first? You have friends? Well, fair-weathered, does anybody know any?
It's an oxymoron.
Yeah. Well, I certainly am not happy with fair-weathered friends because I could put them in the category of betrayal. They're betraying you. They're purporting to be your friend, perhaps in your presence and to your face and when things are going well, but then behind your back, or when you fall on hard times, they're nowhere to be seen. Or they're there, but for only a short time. Only in the short term. They cannot sustain the friendship for too long. This to me, I think, is a betrayal, and I think that we know the expression, I learned who my real friends are. Well, that's something to learn, isn't it? I think that's an important lesson. I think it's also something we teach our children. I think they should know too. Well, now you've learned who your friend is. You are being bullied, God forbid. Your friend is not sticking up for you. Now you know something. That person says one thing about him or herself, but it's not true. Now, why do you want a friend like that? I think you should associate with more positive people who will see it through.
The reason I thought of it is because it seems to follow this. It says, be there when someone, those are often the people that are there when someone's sick. but-
Right, this chesed, be there when someone needs you.
Right.
Don't be what was called a sunshine patriot. Was that Longfellow word? A sunshine patriot. When things are going well, I'm patriotic, but wait a minute. Taxes? Yeah.
I love the statement that you made that the hand habituates the heart. As in Judaism, as though your feelings and your intentions matter far less than what you do.
Exactly.
And it reminded me of the statement that was made by the Israelites, we shall do and we shall hear.
Yes.
Actions precede. I know Dennis Prager has spoken about this a lot. And not to rely on your feelings before you act. That your actions create your feelings.
Right. Because feelings are fickle. I feel like it today, I don't feel like it tomorrow, and I'll base my actions on my feelings. Well, your emotions are not a sustainable guarantor of proper actions. How you feel is irrelevant to me. The deed has to be done.
Prager talks about, has given a short story about when he was in grade school and he said to his teacher that he didn't feel like reading what he was asked to read or something, and he was tossed over the desk. Your feelings don't matter.
That's the way to learn. Yes, Marcy?
I like that you talked about walking in God's image and in God's manners, because we walk every day, every step. We have a chance. We don't jump, we take a step. And every time we take a step in the wrong direction, we're still a foot on another ground that we can step back and walk the right direction. So every step of that walk should reflect what you said.
Thank you. Beautifully said. Yes.
In relation to imitating God, how do we apprehend God's acts of destruction?
Yes.
For example, in the case of Noah's Ark, or even the destruction of the Egyptians in the aftermath of the Sea of Reeds.
Right. Well, that's an excellent question. If we're to imitate God, how about the whole picture? There are many destructive acts of God, which are told in great detail here in the Torah and in the Tanakh. But what the rabbis in the Talmud and what we're told here, you shall be holy, in Leviticus 19:2, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Be kind to the stranger. Love the widow and the orphan. In the Talmud we read examples, clothe the naked, visit the sick, etc. They're always in terms of God's, shall we say, positive, caring, loving chesed characteristics, perhaps because only God can truly judge what should be destroyed. But we have an opportunity to be partners with God in what should be built up. We are not qualified to know all that God knows. And let's say the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. But we are qualified to know that the sick should be visited and that kind of thing. So we can be positive partners with God in terms of chesed. Let me give you an example and we'll conclude. Rabbi Yachnes, he clarifies for us what is necessary to have an action be defined as chesed. Okay, I want to do chesed. What does it mean? He says, if you are walking down the street and a frail person is walking beside you carrying a large box, and you offer to help the person carry the box, that's not chesed. You'd simply be a terrible person if you didn't help someone in that situation. What counts as chesed is when you are walking the opposite way from someone carrying a burden and you're in a hurry and you turn around to help carry that load in the direction that he or she is going. That's chesed. Boy, you've got to carry that weight. Carry that weight a long time. Anybody?
Good song.
So finally, practicing random acts of kindness is not Jewish. This is not walking with God. Judaism calls for sustained acts of kindness, like Mr. Thiel. He was a kindly man. This is the kind of guy that you could count on. You know, people like that, you know if you go to them and you need something, you can count on them. They'll get it done with you, for you. The goal is not to do acts of chesed. The goal is to be what we call in Hebrew a Baal Chesed, a master, to master it. To be a master, you know, Baal, you know, a Balabusta, a mistress of the house, a Balabus, an owner, a master, Baal, a Baal Chesed, a kindly person. This requires consistent acts of chesed day in, day out. So Rav Moshe of Coburn said, a day that a Jew does not do a kindness is not considered a day in his life. If we gaze out at the world and see no chesed that needs to be done, it is not because all is right with the world, but there is something wrong with me. In the prophet Micah, it has been told you, O man, what is good and what the Lord requires of you. Ahavat chesed, asot mishpat, love justice, ahavat chesed, love compassion, chesed, v'asnei alechet im Elokecha, and walk humbly with your God.
Amen.
Do justly, love mercy, walk humbly. What a prescription for a sacred life. Amen.
Amen.
You remember that?